What's up, Otaku Act family? So we pick up with Jinwoo walking down this quiet corridor toward a private meeting room. And guys, his eyes narrowed slightly in surprise because inside the room, he found Norma Selner seated on the sofa. I literally didn't expect to see her again either. Without masking his curiosity, Jinwoo asked what business Miss Selner had with him, and her voice was steady, but there was an edge of unease as she explained that she had been having recurring dreams, and not just any dreams, but visions in which top hunters were being hunted down by someone. The disturbing part? She added that each time she had one of those dreams, the event would come true only a few days later. The weight of her words settled heavily, and Jinwoo's voice dropped as he asked whether Christopher Reed had been among them. David nodded and confirmed that they had indeed warned Christopher about the danger, but he hadn't listened, and they all knew how that had ended. With concern tightening her features, Miss Selner continued, saying that the hunters, who had been pillars of strength in this world, the ones humanity had relied on, were going to keep dying. The force hunting them would not stop until they were all eliminated. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the implications, and he asked if Miss Selner was here to warn him of the same fate. But she shook her head. That wasn't her reason. She hadn't come to warn him. She had come to ask for his help. For the first time, confusion stirred beneath Jinwoo's composed exterior. Miss Selner explained that she wanted him to protect the remaining hunters who were still alive. She'd tried remembering the faces of the culprits from her dreams, but no matter how hard she tried, the memories slipped away. So she said she had decided to take a different approach, one that involved using her ability within the dream itself to identify them. Jinwoo recalled their last encounter and finally understood why she had looked into his eyes so intently back then. She had been searching for something. Her voice trembled as she recounted what happened that day. There had been a voice, an entity speaking to her from within Jinwoo. When Jinwoo asked what that voice had said, she lowered her gaze, visibly shaken, and replied that it had told her to go back and prepare for war. The words struck Jinwoo like a blade of ice. His mind began racing. He remembered the King of Giants' warnings about the battle between the rulers and the monarchs. Could these hunters' deaths be part of that larger conflict? Still trying to put the pieces together, Jinwoo asked why she had chosen him specifically to protect the others. Miss Selner didn't hesitate. She had seen a power within him, the same overwhelming energy that had appeared in her dreams. Jinwoo instantly realized what she meant. It was the power of the Shadow Monarch. If she had sensed the same presence in the hunters-killers, then those attackers must be monarchs as well. David's voice broke in, explaining that the threat they faced was far beyond anything normal hunters could handle. These beings were on a different level entirely, and they needed someone like Jinwoo, someone powerful enough to stop them. He added that the Bureau was willing to offer anything in return for Jinwoo's help, even the runestone left behind by the dragon Kamish. David's voice grew more serious as he stressed that the hunters in question weren't just powerful, they were essential. They were the last barrier protecting humanity. If they fell, there would be nothing left to stop future catastrophes. Jinwoo sat quietly for a long moment, weighing it all. Then, with firm resolve, he declined the offer. David stared in disbelief. Shocked, he asked whether Jinwoo's rejection was because of some lingering resentment toward Thomas Andre after their clash. But Jinwoo made it clear that wasn't the reason. The truth was simpler, and far more important. He still didn't know who the real enemy was, and until he understood that, he couldn't commit to anything. Rising from his seat, Jinwoo turned toward the door, but just as he reached it, he paused. Something pulled at him. Without turning, he called out for Adam White. When Adam approached, Jinwoo asked him to provide the list of hunters the Bureau wanted him to protect. And then, almost as an afterthought, he asked Adam to arrange a meeting with them. Adam's eyes lit up, clearly relieved and more than a little excited. He nodded eagerly, already preparing to set things in motion. The final day of the International Guild Conference had arrived, and the banquet hall brimmed with the presence of the world's strongest hunters and their entourages. Amid the grand celebration, Jinwoo stood beside Jinho, who had finally returned from the hospital. When Jinwoo asked about his condition, Jinho, his eyes misty with emotion, replied that he felt better than ever. He confessed that he had been deeply moved upon learning Jinwoo had fought Thomas Andre, the Goliath himself, all for his sake. Nearby hunters watched them from a distance, speaking in hushed tones as they observed Jinwoo. Despite being right in front of them, his presence was completely undetectable. To them, Jinwoo wasn't just powerful, he was on a level they couldn't even fathom. A man soon approached, introducing himself as the CEO of a global firm dealing in monster remains. With a businesslike smile, he expressed interest in purchasing the bodies of the giants Jinwoo had hunted and asked if he had time to talk. Jinwoo responded coolly that he didn't handle business affairs himself, then nodded toward Jinho, saying the vice chairman of the Agent Guild oversaw those matters. The two men stepped aside to talk, and Jinwoo watched them go with quiet pride, pleased to see Jinho growing into his role. Before long, Adam arrived at the banquet holding a tablet in hand. He handed it to Jinwoo and explained that it contained the names of the top 10 hunters ranked by points, a system based on contribution, mission success, and activity. These individuals, he added, were considered priority targets, and if Jinwoo chose to help, the Bureau would likely ask him to protect them. Jinwoo asked where he ranked on the list. Adam chuckled and answered that he was likely in 3rd or 4th place, mostly due to his performance against the giants. Thomas Andre topped the list, followed by Liu Jigang, then Christopher Reed and Siddharth. Jinwoo skimmed the list briefly, already finding it tiresome to commit the names to memory. Instead, he silently dispatched shadow soldiers to each hunter. Through them, he could stay aware of their conditions and potentially communicate with the rulers, making it easier to discern friend from foe in the coming conflict. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of slow, heavy footsteps. A familiar pressure filled the room as an overwhelming aura approached. Jinho, standing nearby, leaned in slightly and tried to speak, but Jinwoo cut him off calmly, assuring him that it wasn't something he needed to worry about. Then, Thomas Andre stepped into view. One arm was encased in a cast, a clear reminder of their previous battle. He walked up to Jinwoo, eyes steady, and explained that despite the efforts of doctors and healers, his arm still hadn't fully recovered. Jinwoo's magic power had done too much damage. While healing was underway, it was progressing slowly. Thomas paused, reflecting aloud on the battle. He admitted that Jinwoo could have easily wiped out his entire guild that day, and yet no one had died except Wang Dongsu, who had brought it upon himself. He then asked why Jinwoo had chosen to show such restraint. Jinwoo's response was simple. He said that Thomas's guild had committed no crime worthy of death. That explanation seemed to satisfy the Goliath, who nodded with a mix of understanding and respect. He stated his intention to hold a grand funeral for Dongsu, not to excuse his actions, but to honor him in death. As he turned to leave, Thomas made a final request. Once his arm was fully healed, he hoped they could share a meal together. He asked Jinwoo to leave his contact details with his manager so they could arrange it. Laura stepped forward then, politely requesting Jinwoo's information, explaining that Thomas also wished to send a gift in appreciation. Jinwoo initially declined, saying there was nothing he needed, but Laura gently insisted. Her master, she said, was a competitive man who disliked owing anyone favors. Even something small would ease his mind. After a short pause, Jinwoo relented, suggesting that a good dagger would do. Laura smiled at the request, thanked him, and followed after Thomas. Once she was gone, Adam reappeared and suggested they begin introductions with the hunters on the list. But Jinwoo shook his head, saying there was no need anymore. His eyes flicked over the list as he asked about the 6th-ranked hunter, noting that the name was conspicuously absent. Adam looked momentarily taken aback. He admitted that the Bureau had lost contact with the hunter just days before the conference. Even the Brazilian government and their secret agencies hadn't been able to track him down. Jinwoo's expression darkened. There was a chance that the hunter had already been eliminated. With Thomas Andre and Christopher Reed no longer part of the equation and one hunter missing, that left 7 names, 7 more he needed to cast his shadow on. The party was still in full swing in America, while night had already draped Korea in quiet darkness. Inside the Korean Hunter Association, President Go sat alone at his desk, the soft rustle of paperwork the only sound in the room. Yet it wasn't the documents or late hours that weighed on him. It was something deeper, heavier. His heart for some time now had refused to beat normally. It had begun years ago, a subtle discomfort that had only grown more persistent. Recently, the unease had become impossible to ignore. His heart pounded with unnatural force, not from exertion, but as if sounding an alarm that his end could be near. A quiet scoff escaped his lips. The doctors had told him this would happen if he kept pushing himself. Yet, he had ignored their warnings, fully aware he'd long since crossed those limits, and it was nothing short of a miracle that he was still standing. Then the shrill ring of a phone pierced the silence. He reached for it without hesitation. On the other end was the gentle voice of his wife, soft with concern, asking if he was all right. Her words, though brief, brought a rare comfort. He leaned back in his chair and assured her that he was just finishing up and would be home soon. But midway through his reply, a bizarre and eerie sensation suddenly pulled at his attention. Something felt off. He turned his eyes toward the window, and what he saw froze him in place. The skyline, the traffic, the lights, everything had been swallowed by an oppressive black void. Panic began to creep in as he struggled to make sense of what was happening, but then a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision made him stop cold. He turned. There, seated on the couch as if he owned the room, was a man he had never seen before. He sat casually, a faint grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Cold air seemed to radiate from him, the kind that didn't belong to this world. The Frost Monarch had arrived. And that wraps up the International Guild Conference arc. Stay tuned for the upcoming parts, because things are about to get absolutely insane. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part when it drops. I'll see you in the next one as we dive into a brand new chapter. Until then, keep leveling up.